The email arrived on a Tuesday, innocuous amidst a sea of spam and work-related correspondence. The subject line, however, caught Elias Thorne's eye: an unforgettable retreat at Whispering Pines Inn. Elias, a jaded travel writer whose career had plateaued into a monotonous cycle of reviewing boutique hotels and overpriced resorts, felt a flicker of something he hadn't experienced in years: curiosity. The sender was an anonymous account, but the invitation itself was lavish. It spoke of a secluded, historic inn nestled deep within the Blackwood Forest, promising unparalleled tranquility, breathtaking natural beauty, and an experience that would reawaken the soul. A hefty sum was offered for a week-long stay and a glowing review, far more than his usual rates. Too good to be true, perhaps, but Elias was desperate for a story that would reignite his passion, or at least pay off a few lingering debts. He clicked on the embedded link, which led to a beautifully designed, albeit sparse, website. No guest testimonials, no social media links, just ethereal photographs of a grand, Victorian-era building shrouded in ancient pines, and a booking form that required only his name and arrival date. A strange sense of unease settled over him, a faint whisper of warning, but the allure of the unknown, coupled with the generous compensation, proved too strong to resist. He booked for the following week. The drive to Whispering Pines Inn was long and arduous. The paved road eventually gave way to a winding, gravel path, overgrown with moss and shadowed by towering, skeletal trees that seemed to claw at the sky. His GPS signal flickered and died miles before he reached his destination, leaving him to navigate by instinct and the increasingly faint directions he'd printed out. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and an unnatural silence descended, broken only by the crunch of his tires and the distant, mournful cry of an unseen bird. Finally, through a break in the dense foliage, he saw it. The Whispering Pines Inn stood like a forgotten sentinel, its dark timber facade and ornate gables silhouetted against the bruised twilight sky. Every window was dark, save for a single, flickering light in what appeared to be the main parlor. It exuded an aura of profound age, a place where time had not merely passed, but had become entangled, stagnant. There was no one to greet him. The heavy oak door creaked open with a low groan as he pushed it, revealing a cavernous lobby draped in shadows. Dust motes danced in the solitary beam of light emanating from a gas lamp on a mahogany desk. A brass bell sat on the counter, tarnished with age. He rang it. The sound echoed through the silent halls, swallowed by the oppressive quiet. After a moment, a figure emerged from the gloom. She was an elderly woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes a startling, pale blue that seemed to hold centuries of secrets. She wore a simple, dark dress, and her movements were slow, deliberate. "Mr. Thorne, we've been expecting you," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves skittering across stone. "I am Alara, the proprietor. Welcome to Whispering Pines." Her smile, though polite, did not reach her eyes. Elias was led to his room on the second floor. The staircase groaned under his weight, each step sounding like a protest from the very bones of the house. The hallway was long and narrow, lined with closed doors that seemed to hold their breath as he passed. His room, number 13, was spacious but sparsely decorated. A heavy, four-poster bed dominated the space, its velvet curtains thick with dust. The antique furniture, a scarred vanity, a high-backed chair, and a massive wardrobe, looked as though it hadn't been touched in decades. A large window overlooked the dense forest, the pines pressing close against the glass like silent observers. A faint, sweet, cloying scent, like old potpourri mixed with something metallic and sharp, permeated the air. It was a smell that clung to the back of his throat, refusing to be ignored. That night, sleep was not merely elusive, it was impossible. The silence of the inn was not peaceful. It was a living, breathing entity, heavy and oppressive. It pressed in on him, amplifying every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside his window. He heard faint whispers, like distant conversations, just beyond the threshold of hearing. He would sit up, straining to catch a word, but the moment he focused, the sound would dissolve into the darkness. He dismissed them as the tricks of an overactive imagination, a consequence of the isolated setting and the jet lag he hadn't quite shaken. The next morning, the inn felt even more desolate. The library was a labyrinth of ancient, leather-bound books, many with unreadable titles in languages he didn't recognize. Some of the pages were blank, while others were filled with frantic, cramped handwriting that seemed to spiral into madness. The dining room was set for a feast. Fine china, silver cutlery, crystal glasses, but the plates were empty, and the air was cold. The grand ballroom, with its dusty chandeliers and faded, peeling wallpaper, felt like a tomb. As he walked across the parquet floor, his footsteps echoed with a hollow, lonely sound. Everywhere he went, the same unsettling quiet, the same cloying scent. He tried to connect to the internet, but there was no signal, no Wi-Fi. His phone was a useless brick, a reminder of a world that felt increasingly distant and unreal. He found Alara in the garden, tending to a patch of pale, sickly-looking lilies. "Am I the only guest here?" he asked, his voice sounding thin in the open air. She didn't look up, her fingers gently stroking a petal. "We value privacy here, Mr. Thorne. Our guests prefer solitude. They come here to be forgotten, and in turn to forget." Her answer, rather than reassuring him, only deepened the cold knot of dread in his stomach. "But where are they?" he pressed. She finally looked at him, her pale eyes reflecting the gray sky. "They are where they need to be." As the days bled into one another, Elias's sense of isolation intensified. The sun seemed to lose its warmth. The light filtered through the pines, turning a sickly, jaundiced yellow. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. They were no longer just at the edge of hearing. They were everywhere. They emanated from the floorboards, the wallpaper, the very air he breathed. He heard his name, Elias, Elias. A faint and drawn-out sigh that seemed to vibrate in his very marrow. He heard fragments of conversations. A mother soothing a child, a man pleading for mercy, a woman's melodic laughter that turned into a jagged scream. He began to notice subtle, terrifying changes. The portraits in the hallway, which he had initially dismissed as generic Victorian art, now seemed to change their expressions. A stern gentleman would now be wearing a predatory grin. A demure lady's eyes would be wide with a silent, frantic warning. Their eyes followed him with an unmistakable, malevolent intent. The shadows in the corners of the rooms seemed to deepen, to detach themselves from the walls and writhe with unseen movement. He found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, a prickle of dread crawling up his spine that never truly went away. He found small objects moved, his watch on the other side of the room, his notebook filled with sentences he didn't remember writing. "The pines are watching," one entry read. "They want the marrow." One evening, driven to the brink of madness by the relentless whispering in his room, he ventured downstairs. The air in the lobby was freezing, a biting cold that seemed to ignore his clothes. The gas lamp on the desk was out, plunging the space into a thick, velvety darkness. But from the ballroom, a faint, phosphorescent glow emanated, pulsing like a dying heart. Drawn by an irresistible, morbid curiosity that felt like a physical weight, he pushed open the heavy oak doors. The ballroom was transformed. The dust had vanished, replaced by a gleaming, polished floor. The chandeliers, once dark and cobwebbed, now cast an eerie, flickering light that didn't seem to come from any flame. Figures, dozens of them, translucent and shimmering like heat haze, danced across the floor. Their movements were fluid and graceful. A macabre waltz performed in absolute, terrifying silence. They were dressed in clothing from every era: Victorian gowns, 1920s flapper dresses, 1950s suits. Their faces indistinct, their eyes hollow pits of darkness. They were the guests Alara had spoken of. And there, in the center of the room, stood Alara herself. She wasn't dancing. She was conducting. Her pale blue eyes were fixed on Elias, a serene, almost triumphant smile on her face as she beckoned him forward. "Join us, Elias." The whispers in his head screamed. The dance never ends. Elias stumbled backward, his heart hammering against his ribs. He fled the ballroom, the silent dancers pursuing him with their ethereal gazes. He ran through the darkened halls, the whispers now a cacophony of tormented voices, screaming his name, pleading for release. He found himself back in the lobby, gasping for breath. Alara stood there, illuminated by the rekindled gas lamp, her expression devoid of the earlier serenity. "You've seen them, haven't you, Mr. Thorne?" she said, her voice now strong, resonant, no longer the dry rasp. "The former guests of Whispering Pines. They never truly leave," she explained, her words chilling him to the bone, that the inn was a nexus, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. For generations, her family had been the keepers of the inn, luring unsuspecting travelers with promises of peace and solitude. But the solitude was not for the living. It was for the dead. The inn fed on the life force of its guests, trapping their souls within its walls, adding them to its spectral dance. "And you, Mr. Thorne," she continued, her eyes gleaming with an ancient hunger. "With your jaded soul and your desperate need for a story, you are a particularly potent offering. You will be the centerpiece of our grandest performance yet." Terror, cold and absolute, seized Elias. He knew he had to escape. He lunged for the front door, but it was locked, bolted from the inside. He tried the windows, but they were sealed shut, as if by an unseen force. Alara advanced, her form seeming to grow taller, more imposing, her pale blue eyes burning with an unholy light. The whispers intensified, swirling around him, trying to drag him down, to bind him to the inn. He could feel his energy draining, his will weakening. But Elias Thorne was a survivor. He had faced deadlines, demanding editors, and treacherous travel conditions. He would not surrender. He remembered the faint scent, the cloying sweetness, potpourri and decay. He looked around wildly, his gaze falling on the gas lamp. It was old, fragile. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, he grabbed a heavy brass umbrella stand and hurled it at the lamp. The glass shattered, and the flame flickered wildly, then caught on the dry, ancient curtains. Fire, the one thing that could cleanse this place. Alara shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and despair. The spectral figures in the ballroom recoiled, their ethereal forms flickering like dying embers. The whispers turned into screams of agony. The fire spread rapidly, consuming the old wood, the dusty tapestries, the portraits with their judging eyes. Elias, coughing and choking on the smoke, found a loose window in the kitchen, pried it open with a burst of strength he didn't know he possessed, and scrambled out into the night. He ran, not looking back, the screams of the trapped souls and Alara's furious curses echoing behind him. He ran until his lungs burned, until the fiery glow of the inn was a distant, angry beacon against the dark sky. Elias never looked back. He never wrote the review. He never spoke of the Whispering Pines Inn to anyone, not truly. The experience had changed him, leaving an indelible mark on his soul. He still traveled, still wrote, but his words now carried a depth, a haunted resonance that captivated his readers. Sometimes, in the dead of night, he would hear faint whispers, carried on the wind, calling his name. And sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he would see pale blue eyes, filled with ancient hunger, and the silent, eternal dance of the trapped souls. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that some invitations were best left unanswered, and some stories, once discovered, would never truly let you go. The Whispering Pines Inn burned to the ground that night, leaving behind only charred remains and a lingering scent of ash and something else. Something sweet and cloying, like old potpourri and forgotten despair. But some say, on moonless nights, if you listen closely to the wind whistling through the Blackwood Forest, you can still hear the faint, mournful whispers of the pines and the silent, eternal dance of the souls within. And sometimes, just sometimes, you might hear a name carried on the breeze, a name that sounds eerily like your own.